This week, we've been watching a wonderful film called
The Children Act.
The Children Act, and it starred the marvellous Emma Thompson and the magnificent Stanley Tucci, a married couple. She played a high-flying High Court judge, completely wrapped up in her work to do with family law, and he was the husband who was kind of neglected because she gave all her time to her work and none to him. And the thing that really struck us about this was that this seemed to us to be a real situation that happens. Not usually the wife that's wrapped up in work, it's usually the husband, but it does happen, and it can be a major challenge to a successful marriage. So what we felt at the time was if they just sorted this out and worked out what they were going to do to make their marriage a success, they wouldn't have had to play it by ear when things started to go wrong. So what we thought we'd do is to sit down and go through 6 different areas where it's very helpful if couples about to get married, or even having just married, or even along the track, make a decision about how they're going to handle some of the challenges and opportunities that exist in married life. So we've got 6 items to cover, and the first one is children.
Well, children is a very important thing to discuss before you get married because it's rather a big thing in your life to have children. And so it's good to discuss whether you actually both want children and maybe when you might want them and also how many. We know a couple who they had a good marriage, they were young marrieds, and at a certain point the wife decided she'd like to have children and discovered that her husband didn't want children at all and never had. And that ultimately, sadly, led to the breakup of the marriage. If they'd discussed it beforehand, maybe they wouldn't have got married. And it's important to think these things through, and you might decide you'd like 2 children, and we know a family that said that and actually ended up with 6, so we can't always guarantee that things will work out quite as we expected, but nevertheless children are a great joy, and it's a good thing to have that settled before you start on marriage.
Item 2 is career. It could be that both husband and wife have important careers that they are very committed to and want to pursue throughout their working lives. And if that's the case, then both parties need to know about it, and you really do need to discuss how you're going to deal with what will happen if those career paths diverge. If one person's work takes them away to another part of the country or to another country altogether, what are you going to do? Will you stay together, or will you be satisfied and content to live in different countries for long periods of time? Some people can do that successfully, not everybody can, and you really do need to know which category you're in before you start. So career conflict resolution before it becomes a problem is tremendously important. But item number 3 is the big one, money.
Well, money can be, and often is, a subject of a lot of argument and disagreement in marriages. It's one of the major things that people do disagree about. And when you get married, you agree that everything should be joint, that you share everything together, everything you have is both of yours. And we've always had joint bank accounts, but I know a lot of people these days, especially younger people, don't. They have separate accounts. But however you organise it, it's good to have this sense that everything is shared and that nothing is just mine or just the other person's. So it's a good idea to have a good sense of how you're going to use your money. And for example, when we were young marrieds and didn't have much money, we had to decide to do some very strict budgeting. And one of the items that we budgeted for was that each of us was allowed a personal allowance and we could spend it on whatever we wanted. Because sometimes that could be an issue because one partner might think the other is really spendthrift and extravagant, whereas to that partner what they're buying is just normal, just necessity. So it's important that everyone does have a little bit of freedom to buy what they want without being judged for it. And it's also good to work out who's going to manage the money, who's going to pay the bills, set up the direct debits and so forth. And that may change as your marriage goes on, but it's a good idea to start off with a sense of who's likely to do that best, who's got those skills best. And also it's good to think about big decisions when there's big money to be spent on a house or an expensive holiday or something like that. It's good to make that decision together. We always pray together about such decisions, and usually God speaks to both of us and shows us, and we know together we come to the same conclusion. Very occasionally that doesn't happen, and in that instance then we take the decision that as the head of the house, Michael will make that decision. But that's happened very rarely in our marriage. The other thing is that it's very good to be open with one another about money. It's not a good idea, as we know in some cases, where one partner will squirrel away money secretly and the other one doesn't even know about it, and that leads to a breakdown of trust in the marriage, and again that can be very destructive.
Well, we're going to talk about marriage vows now, and of course following on from that, you'll recall that in the standard order of the wedding service there's a little clause that says, "With all my worldly goods I thee endow." So there's a fundamental part of marriage which says you promise each other throughout your lives you will share ownership of everything that you both have. And that's really, really important. And some people aim to be completely independent financially of their husband or wife. Well, they're missing out on one of the most important things. We're in this together, we're a team, we're sharing everything, and that's really important. But the importance of the vows can't be overstated. Very often people have an extremely romantic view of the wedding ceremony. They want to talk about the feelings that they have, and that's all good, and it's an excellent thing to do that. But the point about the marriage vows is that they deal with the real basic tough aspects of life. What happens if one person falls sick or is disabled and the whole balance of the relationship changes? Well, you've made a promise that says in sickness or in health you're going to stay with that person and be loyal to them and be their help and be their support, and no matter what. So when we take our marriage vows, we need to take them seriously. And there's a lot of people who go through it just as a form of words, and what's happening in their heads is they're thinking, well, if it doesn't work out, I'll walk away. And that marriage is almost doomed from the outset when you have that approach. We need to take our wedding vows very seriously. It's about our money, our possessions. It's about faithfulness, an exclusive relationship with one another, not only in deed but also in thought. We're not even to entertain the thought of a dalliance with another person who is not our wife or our husband. And we're also in it for the long term, till death do us part. That's the aim. It doesn't always happen, doesn't always work, but if we don't take it seriously, we can be pretty sure it won't. So marriage vows, tremendously important, but we're going to go on now and talk about time and the use of it.
Well, as Michael mentioned in referring to that film at the beginning, the high-flying judge didn't have any time for her husband, for their relationship. And that really caused the marriage almost to break up. So again, it's an important thing to, at the beginning, set certain boundaries, certain things that you're going to do to maintain the relationship. Relationships need investing in, and that takes time. So it's very important to give time to one another. Date night may sometimes sound a bit corny, but it's a very good basis to go on to make sure that every week you spend some time together, just the two of you, relaxing, talking, maybe going out, maybe just staying in and watching a film, but whatever it is, that you're investing in one another, you're listening to one another, you're enjoying each other's presence, which after all is one of the reasons you got married. And finding things that we can do together, it can be difficult because people don't necessarily enjoy the same things all the time. But it's always possible to find something, and we have to make compromises as well, and that's a big part of marriage, is making compromises. And for example, I've learnt to really enjoy watching cycling because my husband is very keen on cycling. So I've learnt to watch the Tour de France, and that's fine, I can get on board with that, even if I'm maybe doing a crossword at the same time, but I am watching it and I'm with him on the sofa, and that's a good thing, that's important.
Well, our final subject is love. And this is one of the major dimensions of human life. And of course it's meant to find its fulfillment in marriage. And you can think of the relationship of love as rather like a bank account. So you have a loving marriage bank account, and every time you express affection, that little hug in the kitchen just as an expression of encouragement or affection, that pat on the shoulder when somebody has done something well and you appreciate it. The words of appreciation are tremendously important. The expressions of love in word and in action, tremendously important. And each time we do that, it's like making a deposit in the bank account. But on the contrary side, every time you criticize, you neglect, you're harsh, you're unfeeling, or you're selfish in a way that is damaging to the other person, that's like a withdrawal from that bank account. And what we need to do is to keep a really healthy balance. We want to have lots of money in the account. That makes a healthy, happy marriage. And that applies to every aspect of love. There's a spectrum of expression, from that gesture of affection through the times of intimacy and your sexual experience together. And that makes a continuum, and we move up and down that continuum all the time. These things flow one into the other. But they're all very important. They're absolutely vital, and we neglect them at our peril. It's been said that a good sex life occupies about 1% of your waking hours, and a bad sex life occupies 100% of your waking hours. And if we neglect any of these aspects, we are in danger of losing the marriage, which may mean tremendous amount to each other. And the Bible is incredibly practical in this respect, because what it says in the first letter to the Corinthians is that husbands and wives don't have the rights over their own body. It's the other person who has them. So a husband is responsible for caring for and expressing love to his wife in the ways that will please her and satisfy her, and the wife to the husband. But of course there is the perennial problem, particularly after a few years of marriage, that the actual drive is very different between husband and wife, usually much stronger with the husband. And the reason for that is simply hormonal. Men have testosterone coursing through their bodies, which is one of the reasons why they have a strong drive, a sex drive or ambition or competitiveness. All of these things are wrapped up together. Women don't have so much testosterone, therefore they're not naturally seeking a sexual experience as much of the time as men. But what they are is responders. So a wife who's willing to receive the caresses of her husband, even when she isn't spontaneously motivated in that direction, will often find, as she chooses to do that, that yes, the sparks begin to fly and things begin to happen, and this is an experience she welcomes as much as he does. And if both parties are seeking the pleasure and satisfaction of the other one, then this can really work. And it's a little bit like a spark plug in a car. So it appears to be a small component, but it actually is vital. Without it, the marriage can't really fire and be as effective as it otherwise would be. So there we are. 6 incredibly important things to sort out before you get married. And if husbands and wives agree together beforehand on these 6 points: children, career, money, time, vows, and love, then they would be much more able to enjoy every year, we hope of many, spent together. So that's our story.